Early evidence implies that brain and mind do influence the immune system. First, the brain's nerve fibers supply the immune system's organs. Second, cells of the immune system contain receptors tailored for the brain's chemicals, which may mean that those chemicals can trigger immune responses. But is there a cause and effect relationship between a state of mind and the workings of the immune system?
It is very controversial particularly in the medical profession, to accept even the possibility that mental processes could affect cancer. I think this is partly because doctors, we're all taught and have it drummed into us in medical school that there is a rigid division between the mind and the body, which of course is nonsense. We studied a group of 69 women with early breast cancer who had mastectomies, and we found, to our surprise, that the attitudes which they had correlated very highly with survival. The women who had an active attitude, namely fighting spirit, had the best outcome. They were twice as likely to be alive and well 10 years later than the women at the other extreme who showed helpless or hopeless attitudes, who seemed to be overwhelmed by their disease, even though, in fact, it was only early disease at that time.
In the biggest of all the towns, there lived a pastry cook. Do you know what a pastry cook is? It's a baker, really, just a baker. Only old-fashioned people call it pastry cooks.
Rachel Beals has fought the disease for a long time. She lost a breast to cancer 6 years ago. 3 years ago, one of her lungs collapsed from the weight of a tumor, and she was told she had about 12 months to live. Recently, she's had 2 recurrences of the disease. But she started to teach. She's taken up sports. She's an example of what Greer means when he talks of fighting spirit.
I'm sure I would not be here now if I hadn't developed this absolute, total and utter determination that I personally was going to beat this thing, and I was going to win.
Rachel Beals is part of Greer's latest study, designed to discover whether changing a cancer patient's attitudes through therapy can prolong her life.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely vital. I think you must take control. I think that's the absolute kernel, really. I think it's up to me, if I'm going to be positive about this illness, to be as sensible as I can be. It's just ridiculous to let people do pretty dramatic things to your body without asking first what they're doing and whether or not your quality of life will be affected.
Yes, now that's very important, isn't it, that you take control, that you participate with the doctor in treatment instead of just letting it happen.
You can't just sit back and be a passive lump of jellyfish.
These are your most recent scans. If I could just remind you of how things looked back at the very beginning. If you remember, you had a complete collapse of your left upper lobe.
Yeah.
And there was disease on both sides. And then in February of this year, when your problem came back again, you can see here are your 2 discrete metastases. And now in June, they are still there, but they haven't got any larger. But I think the disease is under control. You're not cured yet, but I mean, there's 4 months there.
So you think that's
I think that is very encouraging.
The treatment is a combination of psychological and physical interventions. It does not ignore accepted therapies.
I think you're crazy if you don't use conventional drug treatment. My goodness, you know, it works, and it's worked in my case. But, I mean, I don't just think that you are a machine. I think that you have got a body and a soul and a spirit, and that you've got to utilize all of these. And if you're cutting off the mind, which is a very powerful instrument within your body, you're losing a whole spectrum of what can help make you better. Because I feel very strongly that if you can give yourself a tension headache, or butterflies in the tummy, or cramps, or stiff shoulders, because you're worked up and uptight, why can't you use your mind, which is your mind making your body feel like that, why can't you use your mind to make your body feel good?
The attitudes towards cancer cannot be a cause of cancer. I don't believe that. And we cannot cure patients with psychological factors. But what we can do is firstly, to improve the quality of their lives, and we hope to provide evidence that we may, in some cases, prolong their lives to a certain extent. to increase duration of survival.
Rachel Beals lived 4 more years, and although Dr. Greer would not verify that fighting spirit was the deciding factor in her longevity, there is a strong possibility that it may have been. Since then, other investigators have initiated additional studies to isolate the effect of fighting spirit.
Well, Dr. Greer's work has shown that a certain kind of way of coping with cancer, which he's called fighting spirit, seems to be associated with better adjustment and even longer survival time with cancer. The idea is that people who aren't excessively stoic, who aren't hopeless and helpless, but who have an attitude that I would characterize as realistic optimism, seem to do better in dealing with the cancer. His studies are more naturalistic. They look at the array of coping responses and see who does better. Ours are different in that we do treatment trials. So we randomize women with breast cancer and other illnesses either to routine medical care or to that plus what we call supportive expressive group therapy, where we encourage them to face what they're facing head on, to face the worst but hope for the best, deal with feelings that come up inevitably with having cancer, with their fears of dying and death. We try to help them improve relationships with family and friends and improve communication with their doctors. And we teach them self-hypnosis for pain and anxiety control. And we study the effect of going through that group treatment program on how women cope with breast cancer, for example, and also on the course of the disease. What we found, which is complementary to Dr. Greer's work, is that women who go through this kind of treatment not only live better, but they seem to live longer. In our original trial, we found that women who got this group therapy approach, in addition to routine medical care, lived on average 18 months longer than control patients. So, in a sense, what you might say is that we're trying to teach patients fighting spirit, and that when they learn that, they seem to do better. We have focused so much on medical illness as just a somatic problem that we've kind of ignored what goes on from the neck up. One of our leukemia patients said that he realized he was a football player, a big tough guy who was used to just kind of, knocking down any problem that got into his way, and this one he couldn't, and he found himself on the Golden Gate Bridge thinking about jumping and said, I realized I needed a checkup from the neck up. And that what he needed to do was rethink what this illness meant in his life. And I think very often we get so focused on treating the biology that we forget that there's a human being attached to this body, and that people's array of coping strategies can make an enormous difference. And that what medicine is about is not just cure but care. That is, the death rate's always going to be 1 per person. And so sooner or later we're going to die of something, and we'll need help doing it. And what we found is that patients with similar illnesses can be an enormous source of support, of cognitive restructuring of how they face their illness, of recognizing that they have value even if they can't do and be all the things they thought they were, and that there are ways of coping with the threat of death, with the limitations that illness places on one, with the rigors of treatment, that can make a big difference in how people feel and how well they utilize their health care. And just how good the quality of their lives is afterwards. And I think the intriguing research question for the future is, to what extent do those variables of how people cope, how they understand their illness, how they manage their emotions, affect the course of the disease as well as the way people cope with it? And I think at least now that's a serious question. We're investigating it, other laboratories are, and we're looking to see the extent to which the variability in outcome has something to do with the way people cope with the illness. So it is not the case that you can just fix a problem in your body by changing your attitude, but it may well be that you can give your body a relative advantage in fighting a disease if you cope better with it.